You may have heard of an infectious disease known as polio or poliomyelitis. Very few people suffer from it nowadays, but less than 100 years ago, its consequences were far worse than now. In advanced forms, it can cause paralysis of all muscles and the respiratory tract. Fortunately, in the middle of the last century, scientists found a vaccine against the disease. However, there were several people in the world who contracted the infection as children before the vaccine was invented. They managed to survive, but lost the ability to breathe on their own. That's why they have to constantly use iron lungs. These are sealed capsules that enable patients to breathe. A special collar holds them from the neck down. The pressure inside the capsule is constantly changing, forcing the lungs to fill up with air and then exhale. As a rule, in order to have a normal life, patients must use these iron lungs all their life. For example, an elderly resident of Dallas named Paul Alexander spends almost all his time in his iron lung.
One of the worst cases ever recorded, and I'm still here.
He was only 6 years old when he got polio. The boy was paralyzed for life and was bound to use the iron lung most of the time. However, this did not prevent him from graduating from university, becoming a lawyer, and even participating in court hearings. Sun allergy. As you know, vampires are afraid of daylight and only go out after dark. Needless to say, vampires aren't real, but there are people who lead a similar lifestyle. The twins Thomas and Vincent from the French province of Bordeaux can only go outside during the night. The rest of the time, if they want to go out, they have to wear unusual suits. Sadly, these unusual outfits are not a strange fashion trend, but a necessary measure. Without them, the twins would simply die. The fact is that since childhood, Thomas and Vincent suffer from a very rare disease, xeroderma pigmentosum. It causes hypersensitivity to ultraviolet radiation and leads to the rapid formation of cancerous cells. This is why the brothers have to carefully avoid exposing their skin to sunlight. Half a brain. Our brain, like the brains of other creatures, is a very mysterious organ. No wonder there are so many myths about it. For example, the fact that the size of the brain somehow affects the mental abilities of its owner. Of course, that's not true. A living example is Jodie Miller, who's lived with only half a brain since she was a child. In fact, she was born with a normal brain like all other children. However, at the age of 3, Jodie started having strange seizures, falling to the left suddenly. To the surprise of the doctors, it turned out that Jodie suffered from a rare form of Rasmussen's encephalitis. It affects one or both hemispheres, causing chronic inflammation of the brain. Virtually the only solution is removing the affected areas. So back in preschool, Jodie was left with one single hemisphere. Since the human brain adapts easily and quickly to any circumstances in the early ages of development, the remaining part of the brain took over all of the functions of the removed areas. So, she had the normal life of a normal child. She went to school and had friends and hobbies just like everyone else. And later in life, she got a job and started a family. Heart in a backpack. You probably know it's very hard to find an organ donor. Sometimes you have to wait for years for a transplant, and not everyone has enough time to wait. So what do patients who need an organ right now do? Until recently, science didn't have any answers to that question, but with this technology, everything can change. Since 2010, Michigan doctors have been testing a revolutionary device. It's a portable gadget that uses pumps and compressed air to pump blood through the arteries. By and large, it is capable of replacing a patient's heart. A few years ago, the technology was finally tested on a real patient. Stan Larkin lived without his own heart for 17 months, carrying the device everywhere in his backpack. Thanks to that, he was able to wait his turn for a transplant. Antenna in the head. Cyborgs are real, and here's a living proof of that. Neil Harbison goes everywhere with an antenna because it's implanted in his skull. Moreover, you can see it even in his passport photo. He has a rare condition which allows him to see only some shades of grey. Although this didn't prevent Neil from dedicating his life to the fine arts. He's been making art since he was a child. However, he's still found a way to make his life even better. He learned to translate color frequencies into sound. And then, he used this technology to create a special antenna that he wears on his head to this day. Thanks to this unusual invention, Neil became a modern artist. He realized that he was able to translate any sound into a sequence of colors, so he started creating unusual paintings with digital diagrams, and people found them very interesting. Diabetes insipidus. You've probably heard that an average adult must drink about 2 liters of water per day. A lot of people can't do that. But in fact, it's not as hard as it seems. You just have to cultivate a habit, and that usually takes no more than 3 weeks. If you think about it, 2 liters of water isn't actually that much. Imagine if you had to drink 20 liters. Believe us, some people do. Mark Wubenhorst from Germany suffers from an acute form of diabetes insipidus and has to drink 20 liters of water per day. If he doesn't, his body may simply fail due to dehydration. But why does this happen? The thing is, Mark's body doesn't produce the hormones responsible for kidney water retention, so his body doesn't get enough water since it comes right out of him. For the same reason, Mark has to go to the bathroom 50 times a day. He says that because of this, he's never slept for more than 2 hours straight in his life. He can't afford taking long trips, and he has to follow his daily schedule very carefully. It sounds terrible, but people can get used to everything, right? Mark, like everyone else, goes to work and generally leads a normal life. Second skeleton. When Ramesh Darji was born, he was no different from the other newborns. When he was 15 days old, strange things started to happen though. The boy's mother noticed that his skin was peeling and thick scales started to appear all over his body. The disease was so rare that the local doctors had not even heard about it. After many hospital visits, the parents finally found out that Ramesh suffers from ichthyosis, a rare disease that causes human skin to renew 7 times faster than usual. This in turn leads to the formation of coarse scales. When they appear on top of each other, the skin texture begins to resemble the surface of a stone or fish scales. Sadly, there is no cure for this disease. Its symptoms can only be slightly relieved, but it costs a lot of money. In Ramesh's case, the complications were so severe that at the age of 5, he even stopped walking on his own. In addition, other children were afraid of him, so he became a hermit, didn't talk to anyone and didn't go outside. Fortunately, one day everything changed. A video of Ramesh was shared by a journalist from a local newspaper, and it made him famous. Many people from all over the world found out about him. As a result, several $1,000s were raised to help the boy, and now he's feeling much better. Bubble Boy. Living in a bubble is usually a figure of speech used to describe people who for some reason don't care about the problems around them and show no interest in the people close to them. But for David Vetter, unfortunately, it was not just a figure of speech. This little boy suffered from a rare disease known as severe combined immunodeficiency. From his first day on Earth, he had to live in a huge bubble. This was the only way to provide the child with a completely sterile environment. David was placed there less than 10 seconds after his birth. Water, food, and other items were thoroughly disinfected before being placed in the bubble, and the baby could only be touched through special hand recesses embedded in the walls of his plastic house. Of course, over the years, David's needs grew. He wanted to play with other children and see something other than the contents of the bubble. Parents and doctors did their best. They built a special playground for him, installed a TV in the bubble, and a library too. The boy lived inside the bubble until the age of 12. In 1983, his doctors decided to perform a bone marrow transplant from his sister. They hoped that David could leave his bubble, but immediately after surgery, he felt sick and had to be removed from his sterile home. Soon, the boy went into a coma and died. Since then, many films have been made about his short but remarkable life.
Thanks for watching. Like and comment, subscribe.